Welcome back. So tuned in to News and Views. We are approaching the second hour of the show, and we're going to be doing that with a very, very important conversation: issues around climate change, issues around fossil fuel expansion across the African continent, and it starts right here in the streets of Johannesburg, where climate activists are confronting Total Energies. They're calling for an end to fossil fuel expansion across the continent, and this is not just a local protest; it is part of a broader movement demanding that energy policy serve people and planet and not corporate profits. Just give you a bit of background and context to this before we get to the interview. Total Energies and ECOP are currently under scrutiny. ECOP, the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, pushed by Total Energies alongside Uganda and Tanzania, is essentially a $5 billion oil infrastructure project. It's spanning nearly 1,500 kilometers, and it's one of the world's most contentious fossil fuel development, criticized for its environmental damage and the displacement of local communities. And there's been a lot of organizations, including Stop ECOP and other allied action organizations here in South Africa and across the African continent, who have joined forces with environmental and social justice groups, unions, and coastal communities to protest Total Energies projects, from ECOP to offshore oil and gas exploration projects like those right here in South Africa's coast. And to help us dissect a bit more about the Stop ECOP campaign is Zaki, Zaki Mamdoo. He's a campaign coordinator at hashtag Stop ECOP. Zaki, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you giving us your time this morning and to give insight and perspective on this very, very concerning state of affairs and the work that you guys are doing.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we can start with a bit of background, a bit of perspective for our listeners. You are at the helm of the Stop ECOP campaign. In your view, what are some of the key, issues that the protesters here in Johannesburg and across the African continent are essentially saying to Total Energies and the continent at large regarding this project?
Look, well, ECOP is very much a important case study and one of many across the continent. Where major multinational fossil fuel corporations are driving the absolute destruction of our communities, of course, of our natural world, but also the plunder and the looting of national economies and of our countries across the African continent. You must remember that the East African Crude Oil Pipeline is a major 1,443 kilometer long project that is currently being driven and built from the Great Lakes region in Uganda through to the coast of Tanga in Tanzania. And the entire thing is set up so that multinational corporations like Total Energies and others can exploit the oil resources that exist in Uganda, but also in the DRC, potentially in South Sudan as well, and siphon it straight to the coast, where it will be shipped overseas to serve the energy needs of countries abroad and to line the pockets of a multinational elite at the expense of local communities and at the expense of ordinary people across this continent who are left, to shoulder the entirety of the social and the environmental costs, who are left in a worsening debt trap, and who, in the case of ECOP, at least over 100,000 people have been forcibly pushed off of their land. They've been coerced, they've been co-opted, they've been made to sign agreements for compensation, which is inadequate, which, has left them with no prospects to rebuild their lives. And so the result of that is this deepening social and economic crisis in very real terms in impacted communities. While both a multinational as well as a national elite essentially laugh their way to the bank at the expense of the African people. And this is just one case study. It's a very important one, but the reality is all across the continent, Total Energies is driving plunder and destruction. And it is why, during this week of action that we've embarked on, we're calling ultimately for Total to pay reparations and to get the hell out of the continent itself.
Mm, mm. And I want to stick on that. Total getting out of the African continent. The rebuttal to that would be Africa. Why should Africa be the one that bears the burden of climate justice and responsibility? We are not one of the biggest polluters. There are countries in the West and Asia that are doing far more damage to the planet, and they're not doing much. Why should Africa, which can benefit from investments like Total, for instance, be the one that has to kick out such investments on a continent that is struggling with poverty, that is struggling with youth unemployment? Where do you draw the line? How do you balance the two?
Look, it's an excellent question. I think we need to start by properly understanding what Total so-called investments actually mean for the continent. And by no means can they be seen as developmental in implication. By all means, what Total, the projects that it pursues on the continent, of course, it will dress the thing up as though it is developmental, it is investment, it is creating opportunities for work or for national revenue and all of these things. But it's actually not the case. When you look at the history as well as the ongoing reality of fossil fuel exploitation and extraction by multinational corporations like Total on this continent, the only people who those investments serve are investor cartels themselves. So the
Mm.
only people who actually benefit from those developments are those who are making profits off them, those who have shares and ownership in the thing. And you'll find that most of those people are set up in the global north anyways. Whereas of course, the social, the environmental costs and the damage caused is what's picked up by national governments and what falls squarely on the shoulders of communities and ordinary people. If you look at the case of ECOP again, I mean, both Uganda and Tanzania are debt-ridden countries. And
Mm.
the reality is that much of the limited national revenue that is set to come in from the exploitation of Uganda's oil reserves will simply go towards servicing debt and not go towards to create any kind of real form of development. And so we must start there to understand that these projects are not developmental. But then we should also recognize that, well, the climate crisis offers Africa an opportunity to pursue a path that could actually change fundamentally. Now, we need to ensure that the structures of ownership in our economy change fundamentally. Now, Total and companies like them represent the monopolists. They represent
All right, we seem to have lost Zaki Mamdoo there, but I think we got the gist of what he was saying. There's going to be protests across parts of South Africa. I think one specifically to look out for is the Africa Energy Week that's currently happening in Sandton. It has been called Neo-Colonial Fossil Fuel Summit. And yeah, it's interesting to see how Africa's leadership will respond to this. But I think that question of balance is still a very, very important one about where we draw the line. Zaki, I got you back. I think we can just wrap it up quickly. What kind of actions do you guys have lined up this week? And how can people get involved if they feel passionately about the work that you guys are doing and they want to, put a stop to the impunity that companies like Total Energies have been operating on?
Sure. So, look, there are actions and activities taking place across the continent in South Africa today, but of course also in Zimbabwe, in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Kenya, in Senegal, in Benin, in Togo, in Nigeria, and elsewhere across the continent as well. Here in South Africa, we are gathering at the Standard Bank head office. Standard Bank, which, by the way, is one of Total's major supporters and is bankrolling and financing some of its most destructive projects on the continent, including ECOP and the Mozambican gas projects. So we'll be gathering there this morning and then marching straight from there to Total's head office in Rosebank as well. So please, ordinary people listening to this, come out, join us, and be a part of that movement. At the same time, communities in the Western Cape today are taking the fight directly to Total as well. And I can share additional details around that. But going forward, please do follow on our socials, reach out via the websites and via our email address. It's info@stopecorp.net, because ultimately what we need to be doing is building ordinary people into the movement. We need to shift the balance of power in order to make demands for Total to pay reparations and to get out of the continent. To make those real, to make those tangible, there needs to be a critical mass of ordinary people who recognize and realize that the path that companies like Total represent is one of destruction, it's one of exploitation, and it's one which ultimately threatens the future of all people on this continent and on this planet. Whereas through the building of organization, we can put forward demands and put forward a developmental vision that truly represents the interests of ordinary people for access to housing, access to adequate food, access to healthcare, access to education, shelter and land, and all of these things, through making sure that the infrastructure, the economies at the local, national level are placed squarely and firmly in the hands of ordinary people themselves, so that we can use that to pursue our interests and ensure that the wealth that is created by all of us in the society is indeed owned by all of us as well.
Well, there you have it. Zaki Mamdoo, Stop ECOP campaign coordinator. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. There you go. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, News and Views continues.